And I think we're live. So, good evening, Jonathan Bruderline.
Good evening, Daniel Breezeboss. So nice to have you on the show today.
And so nice to have you on the show today. We're in for
I
a good
feel,
show.
yeah, I feel like Thompson and Thompson from Tintin, or Dupont Dupont as they're known
I
in
think you
the.
mean Zippo Zippo.
What are they called in
I think you
English?
mean
Oh,
Tintin.
I mean
But
Dupont Dupont Tintin, but I assume most people are knowing them as different names. So I just want to make sure that everyone's on the same page about the theme of the show today, which is comic books.
that's right. So, oh no, that's our other feed.
Oh, okay. Sorry. No, no. Today we're going to be looking at pulling and packing. So, what happens from the moment that the order comes in until the moment it actually goes out the door of the pack shed, into the delivery vehicle, and off the farm?
And before we jump into that, I think I should just be clear that it is just the two of us. We don't have a bonus guest today. Maybe next week. So don't be disappointed if you just see us, or be very happy.
Yeah, exactly. Great. Cool. So,
So
Dan,
yeah.
tell us.
So
Yeah, go for it, Dan.
pulling and packing. Why don't you have a question, Jonathan?
Well, in fact, I do, Dan. Um, how about you start by just laying out some groundwork, some principles for what should we be thinking about as we set up our space? Because as some of you know, I'm in the process of setting up a farm, and we're going to be doing home deliveries. And I'm trying to figure out how much space do I need as I'm designing my pack shed. Well, my workstation. How do I set that space up, and how much space, and what's the best way to organize it? So, what are some of the principles that I need to be keeping in mind as I do that, Dan?
So fantastic question, Jonathan. So I guess just to bring everybody up to speed who's out there, and actually, if you're out there and listening to us, please leave a comment, say hi, drop your name, leave a question. We'd love to know who's watching. But yeah, so last week we went through sort of from the moment clients place their order to the moment you ship, and kind of just the process of managing your orders themselves. And we glossed over quickly the part of packing the order. And that's the part that we're going into right here. And so I think a good place to just like two things coming out of the order place thing that's a good first part for the principles. One is get your stuff together that you're going to be pulling. So last week we talked about putting together a harvest list, harvest the stuff that's bulk for the holiday orders and combining it. So you could bring that to your pull area. And the other thing is what your invoices look like.
Hmm.
And I see Tuprine has joined us. So welcome, Tuprine, though it sounds like we're all choppy. I'm sorry to hear that. I hope your connection clears up, and I hope other people can see us. So on one part, it's sort of the bulk harvest list of what you're doing, the total number of carrots, total number of cilantro bunches, if that's what you're selling. And then the other part is the individual orders. So those you'll have brought in. But a good thing with the individual orders is when you're setting up your online store, it's really good to add product codes for each of your items, often called SKUs, which are what do they call them? Stock keeping units. Is that right? Yeah, sorry. So SKUs, SKUs. And having those with your products makes it really easy to manage stuff in other places using spreadsheets. But also, if you're able to adapt your invoice so that all your items are in chronological order by SKU, then you can take your products and put them out in the same order by SKU, and then you'll be in a really good first beginning spot to pull your orders. How does that
So,
sound?
yeah, that sounds good. I think I understand, Dan, but just bottom line, what is the purpose of using a SKU?
So the bottom line about using a SKU is it's a unique identifier that identifies that item across all your stuff. And so maybe you have carrots and you just call them CAR. Maybe that's the SKU, CAR/bunch or /1 kilogram. Or maybe it's something like BR301. But that code always means that crop. And you don't have to worry about changing spelling accidentally or intentionally, or you don't have to worry if you're in a bilingual farm that some people spell something in English, some people spell something in French. And like in the case of beans, we're in French, it's haricots. They're really in different places. So it gives you one way to think about your product. And it's, when you're just doing a harvest list and everything's in the field, it makes sense to just work by products. But when you're starting to pull orders, the SKUs become really, really handy to do stuff. And they also become a good shorthand. I mean, depending what your codes are, when you're dealing with sometimes some of your staff. Yeah.
So do you have numbers for your staff also? So you just say, hey, number 744, to go harvest some 722? Like, that would be really convenient.
That is actually really convenient. I guess somewhere along the line, you do have numbers for your staff if you're using a payroll system.
Yeah,
but we actually use their names. People like that.
Good. It's good. Okay. Great. That's what I've been doing wrong. Cool. So let's talk about how to choose the SKUs for a second there. The first thing that comes to mind for me is that I would probably have them in order of ascending weight, right? So from heaviest to descending weight, I guess. Anyway, from heaviest to lightest, so that my one, if they were numerical, the ones like my 1000 series would be all the root vegetables, and so on and so forth up until greens. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind. But what about you? How do you go about choosing? How do you pick a SKU and decide on what that code's going to be?
Well, I think that I think it's good to group similar things together. Like that's kind of as a starting point, and then leave enough space in your numbers in case you want to add more stuff. So if you decided that your thousands are going to be root vegetables, maybe your 1010 or 1000 teens are going to be your carrots, and then 1020s will be your beets, and then 1030s will be your turnips. But leave some space so that you can add more formats down the line.
Right, formats, and even distinguish between Chioggia and gold.
Definitely.
Gold beets.
Yeah, each of those would be a different SKU if that's how people are placing the orders. And actually, so maybe you want to do 1100 is going to be your carrots, and then like 1110 will be your Chioggia. 1111 will be your 1 kilogram of Chioggia. And you can always change, like once you've set your SKUs, you should keep the SKUs. And you can do things, if you're putting your order forms through a spreadsheet, you can find ways to modify that. You can also find ways to modify that on the back end too. But if you get SKUs that you like right from the beginning, and I think what you've talked about, having the heaviest items have the higher number or lower numbers or higher numbers, one or the other, that's a good starting point. And
because I'm just imagining that as I come to pack orders, I would want the things on the sheet starting with the heaviest, so that I'm not crushing the light stuff at the end.
Well, and that's actually is going to bring us to a couple of the steps coming through. And maybe at the end, we can come back to talk about whether it's best to start with heaviest or best to start with lightest.
Perfect.
So why don't we move forward and out of SKUs, cool. Though that is a fantastic
I do have one last question about SKUs.
Oh, please ask.
I thought about this today as I was working on a spreadsheet, was when I clicked on my cell to drag it down, it was I'm going through and germ testing all my old seed to make sure what's still germinating and what's not. And so I had Red Ace 2016, and when I dragged it down, it said 2017, 18, 19. So I was just thinking, oh my God, I would not want a SKU that ended in a number where I can't even drag it down. Am I just thinking too far out, or I know that we're getting into spreadsheet world here, but I know that's something we both share interest in as well.
I think in this case, rather than dragging, and it depends what program you're using. Sometimes there's different key combinations that'll change whether it goes sequential or not. But you can copy paste, might be one way to do it. You can also highlight the cell. So let's say you have a cell that has something in it. Highlight everything, including the top cell. And if you push Command or Control D, it's going to fill up all of that with the same thing. So handy little pro tip there.
Nice. Cool. Yeah. Well, let's move on from SKUs then.
So let me look at okay, so we've laid out our items in, so you're going to choose, I think it's good to choose a dedicated area that you're going to pack in. And it could be your wash station. It could be an area used for something else. But when it's time to pack, you're going to flip over and it's going to become the dedicated packing area. And you want to have enough space to line out your items. And maybe let's say you had four bins of carrots that you're going to be packing into different boxes. You just got to put one bin of carrot out, and the other ones can be close at hand to refresh once that bin comes out. So set up your stuff, and I would suggest that you are you have your items out, and you, the packer, are moving as you're filling up the order as you go down. And I do know that I've seen on a lot of CSA farms, especially like sort of the more founding CSA farms, where it's like, all the same share. Sometimes people will have all their boxes out and they'll go down and drop a bunch of carrots in each of them. But I think as you're doing much more customized stuff, it might be better to work order by order. What do you think about that?
Yeah, right. So you mean that the items are laid out and you're moving the empty box along the pack line and filling it as you go. I think the other interesting thing about that is that you're actually moving less weight in total than if you're moving the whole box of heavy carrots along the pack line.
It depends on the orders.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so you'll want to move down, and so you have some kind of
And
bin.
one other thing just about that is just the space requirement required for packing. If you're going to pack 50 orders, that's a lot of space if you're only packing 12 or 15 different items. So
Yeah.
so just considering the farms where I've seen that set up are farms like that often becomes a limiting factor in the operation. Like this one farm in particular I'm thinking about, they have a super setup, but it's like they cannot pack more than X number of boxes because they just don't have the space.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So next up, oh, I think I just disappeared from the screen. Maybe I'll try to fix my camera while I do that. But I'll keep talking while we're doing
Cool.
this. So
One
the
other
next thing
thing,
is
just
moving. Yes, go.
one more thing. I think with all this, I would really encourage whatever the setup is to be clearly defined and the same from week to week. So it's not like, oh, we're reinventing the wheel every week and how we're going to pack the shares this week. But it's like, look, this is how we set up our pack line. And if it's not something that's permanently installed, but at least that everyone on the team understands how it is set up. And it's not like, oh, I'm running around trying to find that sawhorse for my roller conveyor because it's off in the other spot, right? It's like there needs to be a certain ease to this process.
Yeah. I think that you're right about that. And I apologize to anybody who sees me frozen on the screen right now. I think I have a bug with my camera and it's just kind of disappearing on me, or I'm disappearing on it. But yeah, I think that standardizing so you can repeat every week is a really great principle. Orders can take a lot of time, and I think it's when you get the real flow of it and you're internalizing it, that's what's going to make it a lot easier for you to do it quicker and start to get tricks. So you want to get all the stuff normal so you can just optimize it. Yeah, and so you're going to want to walk down your orders and build them. And the simplest could be that you have a box and you have your list or your order, and you walk down and you kind of hold the box in your arm. But as you're pointing out, that box can start to get a bit heavy. So you could put it on a cart that you're rolling down, or you could even set up a conveyor belt that you put the bin on the conveyor belt and just roll it down as you're pulling the items.
Mm-hmm.
And something at this point is, and I guess there's different ways that you could do this, but one thing that I would recommend trying out is the bin you're packing into is not your final bin. I guess it might depend on how many items are going into the bin. If you just have one item, maybe you just grab that item and put it in the final bin. But you have your bin, you put it down, and you go down the row, pulling the items into it. And at the end, you hope that you got the right order. But what I've discovered from years of pulling all kinds of orders is that it is really easy to make mistakes. And it's really unfortunate when you only discover that at your pickup location or drop-off location, or if you shipped it halfway across the country. Maybe not for vegetables, but like if it's garlic or seeds. So you want to verify that before you ship it, because taking it, like it's kind of the measure twice, cut once policy. And so after you've pulled your order, you can see the total things that are in your bin, and
Mm-hmm.
then you could transfer it over to the final bin or box or bag, depending what you're shipping in. And and as you transfer each item, check it off the list to verify that it's all there.
Mm-hmm.
And it might feel like it's extra work to do this, but when you've made mistakes and you have to make amends later on, you're losing all the time that you saved by not being accurate.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that verification is a really important thing. And this is why I questioned whether you want to have your SKUs be in order of heaviest to lightest, because probably when you pack your final box, you would want it to be heaviest to lightest.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe when you're pulling, if you're pulling into a bin that's a little bit bigger, you can spread out with the heaviest stuff on the left and the lightest on the right, or something of the type.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Right. Absolutely. And the other approach to verification is that the invoice has clearly labels how many items are in the order. And as you're transferring them into that second box, you're counting and just double checking that you have the right number of items,
yes.
which is obviously less
Yeah.
precise, but it is a way of getting over the whole like, wait, beats, no, yeah, this kind of thing. Whereas it's just like boom, boom, boom. Okay, I got 10 items, go. Or oops, I only have 9
Yeah.
items. Then you go back and say, well, what am I missing?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And
Um,
one thing I like about this suggestion of yours, Dan, which basically for those of you just joining, is instead of packing your orders directly into the final box, packing it into a harvest crate, for instance, that you then transfer into the final box that's going to be delivered to the client. And the other thing I like about this idea, Dan, is it would actually allow you to choose the right size box. Because assuming that we're packing custom orders, they're not all going to need the same box. So at that point, you can choose, for instance, do you take a half bushel or a full bushel box to pack the final order? And you get to actually see all the items that are spatially in front of you, which allows you to pack them much more efficiently rather than you're packing a box, but you see the list, but it's hard to conceptualize how much volume that's actually going to take compared to when you actually have it in front of you and you're packing it into the final box in the most efficient manner possible. Because we're in the business of delivering vegetables, not moving boxes of air, right?
mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And it's good to have a few different, um, so you the same way that you want your your pull setup to be sort of consistent over the weeks, you also want the bins or the delivery container to be consistent over the weeks. And so you probably want to have more than one size, because somebody might have a really small order, somebody might have a little bit bigger order, but you don't want to have 10 sizes.
Mm-hmm.
And there might be some place where you have to decide, are you going to be a little bit overpacked or just a little bit underpacked? And it's also nice if if whatever those units are, stack well. So it could be that both boxes have the same width and length, so they're the same footprint, but one is twice as high as the other. Or it could be that let's say one box is, and I'm making this up, it's 18 inches long by 12 inches. Then maybe another one could be 9 inches by 12 inches. So you could have two together in the same space. So that's something to just think through how it's going to pack. If you're either putting a pallet or putting it into your van, because you don't want to have to play a Tetris game to get this to work.
Yeah, delivery day Tetris, it's the best.
And that's when you know you got your star employees by what they can do.
Yeah, exactly. Under pressure, when it's like, oh, I had to leave 5 minutes ago. Yeah. Anyway, um, all right, cool. So basically, so far we have product codes, SKUs. We have the flow process versus batches. So you're setting out the items and you're moving along with your box, with your initial container, filling it and then transferring it into your delivery box. Compared to laying out all the empty boxes and going around and putting a bunch of carrots in each box. What's next, Dan? Where do we go from here?
Yeah. Well, so I just want to make sure everybody who's listening to us knows that we care, and please feel free to write your name in and a comment if you wish as you're going along. And I've that Kimberly and Sarah have joined us. It's been a little bit longer that they've signed in, but hello. And if you have questions, please ask them. And we are looking for questions to answer at all times. We like that challenge. So please feel free to ask whatever you wish. I mean, preferably related to farm stores and pulling packing.
Or comic books for Dan.
Yeah, but we'll work with what you give us.
Yeah, and
So,
really the question is, with all this stuff we're talking about, it's so each farm has its own nuances and its own context. So in the context of your farm, how is this applicable to you? And what do you need to know or to see differently in order to see, well, what if it, how do you adapt what we're saying to the context of your farm or your operation?
So Sarah just asked a question. How do you label the boxes? That is a great question. And so this is a continuous challenge depending on your systems. Now, one of the harvest bins that we've used is we use Rubbermaid bins. So they have a lid and they have a bottom and they kind of clip. And one tool that we learned on a farm that we worked on, a couple of us worked on this farm, is we actually use receipt paper that rolls up and we just extend a piece and then we write stuff on it and clip it between the top and the bottom. So this is kind of like the really simplest thing you can do. I've seen some people also use chalk on it, but
chalk
what's a little bit more
the chalk pens. The chalk pens work well.
Or the chalk pen. Yes. Now so for harvest bins, it works fine to kind of use this receipt paper. Things don't get jostled around too much once they're packed up and until they get to the drop off. But you don't want to lose that paper if it's orders. And so we've actually moved to masking tape.
Oh my God, Dan!
Use the masking tape. Write down the person's name on it, and if there's more than one box, we'll write like 1 of 2, 2 of 2. And masking tape has the advantage of being really easy to peel off. And this is in the case of using a reusable bin, like a harvest bin or a dedicated delivery bin. If you're putting stuff into not paper boxes, cardboard boxes, or paper bags, something that the client will actually take home with them, then I would probably print right onto a label. So you can, like if you have like a Dymo label printer, you can set up so that either your pack list itself could all be put onto the label, and you could pull from that, or else you could just set it up so that it's the person's name and a couple pieces of information, like if you need to know what drop off or delivery point they're going to. You could also have this set up on an Avery label and just export your information into a spreadsheet and then do a mail merge, or depending how you want to do it, to get that information out. So those are a couple different options.
Yeah,
very high tech.
The fourth option that I've seen, on certain farms is that they have labels that are pre-printed for themselves, and then they use a marker to specify what's in the box.
So with the pre-printed labels, that's like a laminated piece of paper, like maybe a square,
square about
4 or 5
about
inches wide,
this big, that's pre-printed, and that was in the context of delivery to restaurants, which obviously is not so much the case these days. But they had the same, with different boxes that said the information, like number of items per case, what's in the box, who's it going to. So they had essentially a pre-printed template that they would then fill out with a black Sharpie or a permanent marker.
And that template is like name, drop off date kind of sort of thing?
Yeah, exactly. But
not necessarily the contents.
Well, in this case, it would not be the contents. But in the case that I was seeing, they were delivering to restaurants. So they were writing, arugula, 12 times 200 grams or whatever.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so, this year, we're actually trying to figure out what we're going to do on our farm, because we have been taking pre-orders for extra stuff for our CSA for years, and this is how we've worked with the masking tape specifically. But we've always also accepted purchases at the drop off. So there was kind of cash transactions, and we had some extra stuff people could purchase. But we're going to be shutting all of that down, so there'll be no cash transactions or no additional sales. And so we're expecting a much higher amount of pre-orders. And so this is where we really want all the systems to be going through. And so handwriting stuff on masking tape, that can take time. Like if you have 5 orders or 7 orders, it's not a big, it's maybe quicker than getting it printed out. But if you have 20 or 30 orders, I'm pretty sure the printing out, if it's all set up well, will be quicker. France from Le Refuge Farm in Yellowknife is here also. Do you know France?
Yeah, hell yeah. Our northern connection up there.
Well, welcome. And so keep those questions coming if you have them.
Cool. So while we're on the topic of labeling, Dan, I want to talk about 2 cardinal rules that can really improve workplace, enjoyability and even save some marriages. Which is when you.
I want to hear these.
So always put the labeled boxes in the same direction so that the labels are all visible from the front of the pallet. And the other thing, this is the real kicker that'll save your marriage, is take off the old labels when the box comes back. Because,
yes.
I mean, the joy of having a box that has 2 labels on it, I mean, you might as well not label it, right? Anyway, and this is the type of thing where you have to get into that habit right away. Otherwise, you end up with some boxes that do, some don't, and you end up having to check each one. So you might as well not label any of your boxes at that point. Anyway, so always putting the box in the same direction so the labels are visible, and always, first thing when that box comes back to the farm, part of the washing process is taking that label off.
I couldn't agree more with that. That's really a great principle, and that's also goes for when you're reusing, like in this case, talking about reusable boxes, but sometimes you might have something that like a client returns cardboard boxes that they used before, or if you're using, like I'm just thinking recently, on our seed company, we reuse sometimes, like we store seed in like these Ziploc bags, and sometimes we'll reuse them after a lot is finished. And we recently had some corn seed that we were looking for and couldn't find, and then it turned out to be in the squash seed, and we're like, how did it wind up there? But then I noticed that on the back it was an old squash bag, and you could see it was faded, but you could still see the old code, and it had just been flipped around when the person had been putting stuff away, and so they just followed that, and that's where it wound up. So I think that those are really good principles.
Mm-hmm. Right on. Cool. So we've great question. So with all these things, there's really like two overarching flows that we need to be aware of. There's the flow of product and the flow of information, right? So from the information flow system's perspective, it's having the right information at the right place at the right time. So that includes, I think there's so much efficiency to be gained from that point of not having to, even if it's 2 steps to check a list or something like that, but to have that right information, to have the invoices all stacked at exactly the right location, have all this set up ahead of time. And the other part of that is the product flow. So how is the material flowing through the space? And one tool that's really fantastic with that is the spaghetti diagram, which is simply to take a piece of paper, draw out the movement of the product, and see, does it look like a bowl of spaghettis? Well, it may. And the purpose of the exercise is to straighten and to shorten the spaghettis. And I know it seems silly, but it took me a couple of years before I actually tried it after reading about it. And I was like, wow, this is great. I should have done this years ago. So these 2 are like overarching things. How are products, materials, and people flowing through the space, and how is information flowing through my system?
And so that's great. And this is something that is, so you want to go into your orders conscientiously, and you want to design before you get there, but also you want to pay attention when it's happening and see how the delivery actually is, or the flow actually is, and notice where things hang up. And let's say and with the intention of improving later on. So if you set your items out and you notice that it just doesn't make sense to go from heavy to light, you can start from the other end and work back and see if that makes more sense. Or if you notice, I don't know what you'll notice, but like if you only have 5 orders, maybe you just finish it the way it is. But if you have 30 or 40 orders and you're at order number 5 and you notice there's something that's hanging you up, take the time to fix it and pay attention to why it's a problem, and your flow will get better. And it's worth, like, during, especially the first times that you're packing orders, sometime in the middle and again at the end, stop to think and reflect on the experience, whether it's going well and whether you're happy with it and how you could improve it. Because the next time when you go to set up, if you haven't done that reflection, you're just going to kind of be starting almost from zero again. Whereas if you take the time to think through and figure out what your challenges are, you'll be in a much better place and you'll be able to learn from your mistakes the next time.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes, Dan, we're so in the action that it's like we're too close to see it. So a great practice is to let your co-farmers or your employees run the pack line for a while and just take a step back and literally do nothing, have a coffee and watch the flow. Because from that different vantage point, you'll be able to see it differently. That point was really driven home to me. I was visiting Paul and Sandy Arnold down in New York State. And I noticed there was a small security camera in the corner of the pack station, the wash station, filming the wash station. I was like, oh, is that so you can, like, I don't know. I was sort of confused. I was like, oh, is that so you can, like, keep an eye on your employees, make sure they're working well? And he says, no, that's actually that they actually watch the footage of the wash day, but in fast forward. So that it's, they watch the whole day in 20 minutes or whatever, but they are able to see the flow of people, the flow of materials, and pick up on bottlenecks in that manner. So, I'm not saying you have to install a video camera, but just having that perspective of, like, being the fish that's out of the water and actually looking at the system rather than only being in it.
I love that security camera. I'm gonna have to talk to my co-farmers to see if we can do that, because that's actually what you're doing is you're watching the spaghetti diagram in action,
Yeah.
and you'll see where it crosses up. Something else about having employees on your farm is you want to be able to explain to your employees what's happening. And if it's so complicated, your setup, that if they can't actually understand clearly what you're doing, you have a problem. And so that can be some of the test as to whether it's going to work, is whether you can actually explain it to somebody in a coherent fashion. And I think a really good pull system needs next to no explanation. You can just bring one of anybody, an employee or a friend or a parent, and or a kid, and just give them a box and the order and say, pull this. And if they're able to get it right on the first time, you probably have a good setup. Whereas if they have to jump around and it's a little bit of a headache to do it, there's definitely a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was something you said made me think, the power of having a checklist, right? So a checklist for setup and breakdown, right? So if this is a space, a workstation that you're sort of assembling in your wash station, and then you're taking it down when you're done packing, or even if it's a permanent setup, I mean, just having 1 or 2 people, depending on the scale of your operation, just take the time to set up the workstation first and have a checklist to say, okay, did we do this? Did we do that? Did we do that? Yes. Okay, now we're ready to start rolling.
Yeah, I think that checklist is definitely a good thing to do. A good thing to do.
Did you know, Dan? Did you know that you can laminate checklists or put them even just in a plastic sleeve and then use a dry erase marker to, like, check stuff off and then erase it at the end of the day? I mean,
I've heard people do that.
Yeah, I learned that this summer at Vipassana in the bathrooms for the, like, cleanup chores. There was a checklist, and I was like, oh my god, this would be so good on a farm.
Actually, so this is not I guess a Facebook Live about lamination and
this is not about comic books either.
No, but getting a laminator is a really fantastic tool for the farm. We purchased one years ago, and it gets so much use for all kinds of signs. Like when we were at market, we would make signs with that. But even just for signs for staff, or checklist, as you're mentioning, it's really fantastic to have something like that on hand.
Yeah, I can imagine. Great. So as usual, we're Dan and Jonathan. We're talking today about pulling and packing. So the process of, once the order's in, and you got the order, well, how do you actually physically assemble the order? And so far, we've been looking at having a product code, having a good setup, laying out all your materials in a certain order, and then having your box flow along as you pack it, and then transferring it into the final delivery container. We've talked about taking the time to really reflect on improvement, what's working, what isn't, taking a step back, watching other people work, and just checklists, setting up and breakdown checklists. So if you have any comments or questions, feel free to post them on the Facebook page. We always love to answer all of this. And yeah. So, all right, Dan.
So, John,
yeah, go for it.
I was going to ask, on your farm that you're setting up, where do you think you'll be building your orders?
I think I'm gonna have I'm gonna have a dedicated place for it next to the in close proximity to the cold room, and I was trying to. I think I've come to the conclusion that setting up some sort of U shape is going to be the best. Be, yeah, just in terms of space efficiency, but also in terms of, you start, let's say, over to the left, you work your way down and around the U, and so you end up over to the right. Well, then to start again, you don't have to walk all the way to the start of the pack line. You just have about 5 feet to go, and this is especially pertinent given that we're going to be packing into an intermediary container, so like into a harvest bin, and then packing it into the final delivery container. So that the path that intermediary, like that harvest bin, has to travel to go back to the start is very limited. Well, what are your thoughts about that? U versus L? Well, L, I don't know. Anyway, U versus straight line, if you had the space.
I like a straight line, and I can see the advantage of a U, but I like things to be nice and clean, and you kind of have a beginning and an end. It might depend on how many items that you're working with, and so I'm seeing that. Like, I don't think there's going to be more than like a dozen items or so.
Mm-hmm.
So it's probably something that's going to be like 6 to 8 feet of lint. Like, does that make sense?
No,
That
12
doesn't make
items would
sense.
be 18
No,
feet.
yeah. So, well, it depends how you could, if your bins, depends what direction your bins are in and what your bins are like, and we could, but yeah. So, 18 feet does seem like a long ways to be running down, and to kind of get back to the beginning spot. So, but I have been tended to think more in terms of straight, and we'll see we'll see what I say later on this summer. As I've said, this is like the first year that we're going to be doing the volume that we're at. Right now, in terms of like the pull room that we have in the seed trailer, this is really a straight wall, and you start from one corner and just work your way down, and then you go back to the beginning. And that's something that's about maybe about 15 feet that people are going through to pull an order. And
What are the biggest differences that you're anticipating that you're going to come across as you transition from packing light items like seeds to packing heavier items like veg? What are the differences you're anticipating?
So we actually do pack some heavier items at times. Like, we're just in the middle. We're about 2/3 of the way through our seed potato orders. Later on, we're going to be doing garlic. A little bit later on, we also work with cover crop seeds. So those are heavier things. So I think that what are the big differences? I think the fluffiness of some of like the salad greens, and I think that's something you were talking about, putting the heavier stuff on the bottom. I do think that is something that we'll need to think of more, because actually we have not tended to sell salad greens and greens or like kale bunches really by pre-order. We've just tended to sell them directly at the drop-offs. We might do like 10 bunches of kale as a special order, whereas this year we're going to have more of those smaller pieces, and I think that's going to be some of what we're going to be working with. And I think that so all of you watching have different farms, and some of you might have farmers markets where you have 60 items on your stalls, and that's what you're trying to replicate. And some of you might have, just like a CSA, like we're doing, and so like in the case of a CSA, and if we're going to have extra items on you can order, it might be mostly what's already available in the basket, and then a few extra things. We won't necessarily be offering everything that's available or aiming for that diversity. And so I think that those are some things that need to be considered of, when you're crop planning and when you're choosing what to grow, you've got to think about how you're going to be packing in your box so that it's not extra work. Like if you only sell three of one item, is it even worth having it have that spot? And that's something that in our seed company over time, there's some items that you might sell 600 or 1,000 packs in a season. And then there's other items that you sell 15 packs. And so those 15 packs, it's probably more work to actually have them and offer them than whatever revenue you're generating from it. And so that's something that we'll be looking for a little bit as we get into this online store, into these bigger orders and more orders, is where that sweet spot is that we can offer a wide variety without compromising some of that flow. And it might be that we have to do some different stuff that we're not expecting.
Yep, absolutely. Cool. And so what happens after that? Once the order's made its way around, you've packed into a box. Where what are the key elements that we need to be tracking after that? Like you were mentioning fulfilling the orders or the next sort of steps along that process.
So something good to think about is how soon is this leaving the farm? And because stuff different vegetables have different storage requirements. Some, if you have garlic or onions, they don't really want to be at low wet temperatures, or tomatoes or cucumbers. And some of them can tolerate a little bit, or basil. And then some things you want it, like if you have salad greens, you want to have that at 4 degrees Celsius as long as possible. And maybe a little bit lower, depending on your cold room. So if you're mixing an order that has all these different things into it, you'd want that to be shipping as soon as possible. And so in our case, we are going to be building orders in the late morning of a delivery day. And our barn is fairly cool, so we'll be able to pack up and get stuff out without having to worry about different requirements. But if you were packing a day before, or maybe not 2 days. 2 days before might not be great for some of the perishable stuff, but a day before, you might need to split your dry warm stuff from your cooler stuff, and so that's a consideration to have, is how soon are you getting out. And then in the case of if you're doing a pickup or a delivery point where you're physically going to be there, people show up and then you hand them boxes. It's different than if you're going to be doing a delivery where you're dropping off at different houses, where you need items to be in the right order. If you're doing something where people are picking up, you're going to have things packed in your vehicle in a way that it's easy to see those labels and who those items are for. And so that's the next step that goes into that. And that gets to be very different depending on the size of your or your delivery vehicle, whether you can put a pallet in or whether you're hand loading.
I think it's important to mention that if you're going to be delivering to the house custom orders, that's something that you need to be considering before you even start packing the order. That you are loading, you are filling the boxes in the right order so that they end up in the cold room in the right order, in the van in the right order, and out to the client in the right order. Not, okay, all the orders are packed, now how do we order them in the cold room?
Yeah. That's a great thing to work with. I think it's also so that order of pulling is really worth figuring out. And So so in the case of doing delivers like that, that makes sense. Also in the case of if you have to manually, like if you were going to ship things elsewhere, um, or you're manually fulfilling after the fact on your online store, it's really nice to have orders in that are sequentially packed in the order of the invoice number, because your default on your online store like dashboard will be in the sequential number of the order. So it's nice to just be able to then go through each one if you're printing labels for each one, like shipping labels I'm talking, or if you need to go back and then fulfill afterwards on the online store, just to mark that it's been completed.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
so it's
So
worth thinking about that.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. I wonder, this whole question of cold room, cool room, different storage temperatures. It's a really good question because, I know some farms, and I'm going to reach out to them after our call to see what they're doing about it. Because I know some farms who literally pack the truck, at the end of the day, plug in the reefer unit so it's a refrigerated truck overnight, and then the driver's going out at 2:30 or 3 in the morning. So I guess the time lapse, if they're packing the orders at the end of the day, loading the truck at the end of the day, and then it's in the cool overnight, it's not that bad. But still, I'll have to check in with them, see how they're doing that.
I think too in that is there is ideal temperatures, and then there's an area that's kind of forgiving for short periods. But it really the plants are a lot more forgiving if they've been stored in the right conditions beforehand. So if you get lettuce,
Mm.
you bring it into your wash station, you dip it in water, take out all the field heat, you've hydrocooled it, you get it into a cold room that's kind of like 1 to 4 degrees Celsius, and it sits there for 12 hours or 24 hours. It's really cool at that point. It's going to come out looking crisp and nice, and it might be able to sit in a reefer truck that's 6 or 7 degrees, without showing problem for
Hmm.
a few hours.
Right.
Now, that's not what we do, but I'm just speculating on that. Whereas if you take something straight from the field, you put it into a box and you throw it in that 6 or 7 degrees, it might not look so nice when you pull it out.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's for sure. That this process, at least the way I'm seeing it, is definitely not directly out of the field. Like it's not harvest and pack the boxes as you go. It's really harvest, put in the cold room, let it sit overnight or however long to get it cool, and then bring it back out in order to work on packing the orders. And ideally, not packing the orders somewhere super hot in the sun. It's sort of
Yeah,
obvious, but still, I mean, it's worth mentioning, right?
and I'm kind of taking it for granted, but it is worth mentioning that for sure.
Right. Because
And
the
out of the
produce is,
wind.
yeah, it's not going to get any better once it leaves your farm, right? It's only downhill from
Well,
here.
unless you add a little bit of garlic and some soy sauce and
Uh, some bacon and some cheese. Yeah. Yeah, cool. And one other thing you mentioned earlier, you mentioned using a conveyor. And so this brings me to the next principle. I don't know how many principles we're at. The 47 key principles to packing your order. No. Yeah, so the principle of wheels. I mean, how long has it been since humanity has invented wheels? What an amazing invention. And still, it baffles me how sometimes we overlook that. We're like, "Oh, it's only 10 feet. I'll just grab this box and walk over here." And I really want to highlight that this is a lot of materials handling. It's been said that farming is the process of moving stuff around, and so this is critical that if stuff is moving, it's on pallets. It's on using hand trucks with these little what they call out west palletitas, which are like really short little wooden pallets that you slip the hand truck under, keeps the stuff off the ground and makes it really easy to grab, or conveyors, right? And you mentioned conveyor belts earlier, and I just want to make sure that people understand it doesn't have to be a fancy like conveyor belt that's turning with an electric motor or anything. It can just be those rollers. Um,
yeah, those rollers. Yeah,
yeah. So that's something that is definitely important, that everything be moving around on wheels, and that we don't underestimate the distance that we're covering, because even, it might just be 10 feet, but if you're doing that with a 20-pound box 50 times in the day for 20 years, that's a lot of power, a lot of
yeah.
weight being moved.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of lifting the least amount of stuff as possible. Um, I think that when you're a young farmer, working on a farm in your early 20s, you got a lot of power, and you're happy to lift 2 or 3 bins of carrots at once. But nowadays, I don't think it's worth it.
Mm. Yeah. Um, Now the question of items that are weighed out or in volume, right? I presume
Yeah.
that we're not going to have a scale next to each box of carrots and beets and we're weighing out our 2 pounds, that these need to be pre-packaged ahead of time so that when you come to just start packing, it's just boom, boom, boom.
Yeah. That's that. I'm glad you brought that up. I hadn't thought about mentioning that. Um, but that kind of goes back to at the kind of what we're talking about last week, where you have your orders and then you have your compiled harvest list. And your compiled harvest list, you're kind of it's sort of in terms of the funnel formats that you're looking at. So let's say you're doing bulk carrots. Maybe you need 21 kilogram bags of carrots, and then you need 5 kilogram bags of carrots. And this is what you want to prepare beforehand. And you have your bins, all your 1 kilogram bags of carrots in one bin, and then all your 5 kilograms in another. Those are already packed out. So when it comes time to building the order, you're just going through and pulling it. Um, and I think that that's kind of like I would tend to recommend that. It's not, there might be some situations where it's not true, where it's not great. Like right now, we're doing potato orders, and we have sweet potato orders that I've mentioned, and I mentioned last week, and we're doing hundreds of them. And something that we've done in the past with some of these is we'll know that we need like 200, 1 pound bags of this variety, and 100 5 pound bags of this variety. And so we'd pack those all up, and then we'd go and we pull the orders. And sometimes at the end, you wind up with, you got a couple pound bags extra, and you're missing a couple other bags, and you're wondering, where did these bags go? And what we're doing what we're doing now is we've actually printed out labels for all the orders, and on each label it says the format and it says what order it's supposed to go in. So, and all the labels are in chronological order. So if you just start from the top, and you also have your invoice that has what's in it, but you look at the invoice and you can be able to find the next, 3 or 4 labels might be part of that invoice, and then packing that order, um, custom packing it. So we have a wall with our 7 potato varieties, and there's a scale right in front of it. And we have our different bags and boxes. And this is kind of more of a U setup. And the person stands in the middle and then pulls the right stuff, puts it into bags, and then turns around to the right and can put it straight into the shipping boxes. And then we can weigh it, note those weights and dimensions, so that we can then go back to the barn or the trailer to print out shipping labels. And so that's a step that's actually, it's kind of like a second handling of things. But otherwise, um, with our potato orders, we're really doing the whole thing in one just one process, just handling the same items just one time to get them into that
Mm-hmm.
box. And so it's not inconceivable you could do something like that with bulk roots or some of your crop. But you want it to be not too dirty, not too messy, not too wet, especially if you're handling a lot of paper stuff. But it is feasible that you could do that.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I think the other thing to mention with bulk root vegetables is working with volumes rather than weights. If you're going to be doing that, right? To have a standardized volume that okay, this basket weighs a kilo. This basket the content. If I fill this with carrots, it's going to be a kilo of carrots. If I fill this with whatever, it's going to be 5 kilos. Rather than having a scale and having to weigh it out each time can be a pretty good efficiency tool as well.
If you're accurate, and I I I think that I would, if you have a big enough scale that's sitting in front of you, and you could kind of just pull stuff, put it on the scale, and then bag it up. It's easy to go under, or so if you go under, then your client is not getting what they paid for, and if you go over, you're going to use more product than you should. So I think it's I definitely hear where you're coming from, but I think it's kind of comes back to that verification step to to be able to just be sure that what you're getting,
Hmm.
what you're giving to the client. And I mean, and it might be like, and that's
And
something that's different
that
than a
would be
farmer's market.
And that would also be different depending on whether you're packing custom orders where someone really said, I'm buying 1 kilo of carrots versus someone who said, I'm buying a farm share this week. And,
Yes.
we really don't care if there's 900 or 1100 grams of carrots in that box, as long as you do 50 boxes with that, whatever, how many kilos that works out to, right?
Yep. And so I think that's a great distinction there. It's
Mm-hmm.
just what people are expecting they're going to get. And I do know some places actually have stricter laws about that. Um, but
I'm going to sell my
so
root
it's good to
vegetables
know.
by the liter.
Yeah, juiced. Um, um, there was one thought you just said there. Anyway, it'll come back.
Custom orders versus if you're packing custom orders versus um, standard CSA boxes, volume of the carrots. No.
Oh, I was gonna. Yeah, just it's if you have multiple people who are pulling these orders and packing, like even within yourself, you'll vary. Once you kind of have like you know that this filling up a quart basket to this weight will to this height will give you this weight. Even like you'll have some variation, but if you have three people doing it, you're going to have a broader variation that's going through.
Mm.
And in that case, it's probably better to err on the side of more than less because you want your people to feel really happy with what they're getting. But there are some people, some of your staff that are going to take that to heart and really give them a lot more just to make sure they feel good. So, you know, if you're tight on an item, then that really makes a difference. I mean, if you have to harvest 10 or 20% more, you know, it does add up over a lot of crops.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Totally. All right. Cool. Well, and then just I guess while we're on this question of volume versus weight, the final possibility I'm seeing is sometimes what I would do at market, which is take one of those bulb crates and weigh out pre-weigh a bunch of items in it. So you could conceivably have essentially combination of what we're talking about, where you would have the bulb crates, with you'd have 15 quarts in there, and you would have weighed to make sure you had a kilo of carrots in each one, and then as you go, you're just popping them in loose rather than packaged. So that would be another way. I don't know. What do you think of that, Dan?
Um, I think,
Because the question I'm looking at here, Dan, the real question is, okay, let's say you're packing. It's okay if you're just packing one of these items, but what if you have, potatoes, beets, onions, and some other root vegetables? So you could be packing 4 to 6 different root vegetables. Are you saying we need a scale next to each one of these? Because otherwise, it's going to be
well,
a
that
lot of this
depends.
kind of
Maybe
stuff.
this is where your you might be really, really good um, to have the stuff within reach of doing it. I think what you have to think about. So what you're going for in this is you're going to save time that you're trying to and if you're and this might really be relevant to some of our listeners who are market gardeners who go to farmers markets and you know they're not used like you're used to kind of going out there with bulk stuff and putting it in containers or shelling it by weight at the actual event, and it add a lot of extra work to kind of be at your farm weighing everything out. But I really think that you should consider your client's final experience of when they open the box and are they going to be really happy. And this can come back to how you describe what you're selling to people. But people do like to have things sold by either a weight or a count. They don't necessarily want it by a volume, like, I mean, unless it's a liquid. And so I know that we've had people who, will sell beans at the farmer's market. Or when we went to farmer's market, we sold beans by the quart. And we would, in the early days, I would say, it's about a pound of beans. And I remember one person bought some beans, went home, and she came back 2 hours later and said, that's not a pound of beans. And she had went home and weighed them. And I gave her some more beans to make up the difference. And then I never called that a pound of beans ever again. I just called it a quart. And so it depends on how you describe it. And you want people to feel like they've gotten their money's worth and more, and that they're really excited about what they have. So don't design around speed and efficiency at the expense of your client's experience. Design speed and efficiency to get to your a great client experience, and
Mm-hmm.
they notice and they remember.
Right. Right. Yeah, so that when they open the box, that it's looking, and this can also play into the size of the box, also, right? To having, two, maybe three different formats that you're packing into, because there is something about opening up a box and seeing just some vegetables laying around in the bottom of the box versus opening
Yeah,
up a smaller box. They're like, wow, what a great box I ordered from my farm this week. So
yeah,
yeah, I mean, for sure, I know it's just psychological, but it has a huge impact. And that first impression when they open that box and go, "Oh my God, what a great order this week."
totally. I totally agree with that. Yeah.
Right. So we're going with begin with the end in mind. So what experience do you want the client to have when they open that box? And you're working all the way back to, okay, what are the what's that setup? How do I set myself up so that I'm doing this in the most efficient manner in order to produce that outcome? And tracking, I would by all means say tracking number of orders per hour packed, or gross dollars per hour packed, or whatever parameter seems right to you. But having some sort of measurable parameter that you're measuring as you develop and improve this setup.
That's an extra great step to put into it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think, with all this, if you're able to start the season with a smaller volume of orders so that you can learn on that, that's not a bad thing. So that
Mm-hmm.
you can improve your process. Now, sure, if you wind up with a huge amount of orders right off the bat, congratulations on your successful online store. Um, but maybe give yourself a little bit extra time to pack those orders to make sure that it goes well and that you learn.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Great idea, Dan. Cool. So
So
hey, look what time it is.
it's 9:02.
Oh my God, it's past bedtime.
Yeah,
So,
very
what are
much
the
so.
if anyone has questions or comments that they want to put out before we call it a night, like this is your moment. Shoot. What are you wondering about? What are you getting out of this conversation for yourself?
And also, if you have questions listening to this after the fact, post away here or write a post on the Move Your Farm Store Online Facebook page, or send us a message. We love questions. We love comments. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Thank you so much for being here with us. Really enjoy this opportunity to share these conversations that Dan and I have. We've been talking for a while over the years, and just realizing, hey, this is a great conversation. We should be having this with with other people. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks a lot. We really appreciate your
Hmm.
participation, and we hope that your seasons are lining up well.
Yeah.
And we'll be back next week on Thursday at 8 p.m. with some more Farm Star goodness. So until then, have a great week.
Yeah. Farm on.
And on that note, good.